Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about how to approach large, simple rewrites. As you work on systems, there will be times when a large rewrite is needed. I'm not going to talk today about the large, challenging rewrites where you're maybe changing the architecture of a system or splitting classes up. These can be larger rewrites that maybe need a carefully written tech doc and probably will take a lot of PRs to complete, and they're going to require a lot of thinking. Instead today, I'm going to talk about the larger, simpler rewrites that are logically simple but change a lot of lines of code. A brief example would be something like migrating a large number of callers from a deprecated function to a new function. If the interface is the same, maybe it's just a different function name, and it would be an easy PR to understand, but could touch a huge amount of lines. These changes can be tricky. I've seen PRs go out for review before where there are tens of thousands of lines changed. And the comment is just something like changing duration from int to float. How do you review these PRs? Not easily. In theory, as a reviewer, you should look at all those lines, but that's probably too dull to do, and is that really the best use of your time? You maybe skim a handful of lines, but at a certain point, you'll probably just make a call based on how you feel about the author. If you trust them, you'll probably approve the change and let it get merged. And if you don't trust them as much, maybe you'll reject it and say it's too big to review. And I think that's a valid rejection. In fact, generally speaking, for cases like this, I think the rejection is really the only appropriate response. We want to avoid saying that we've reviewed code when we haven't. So how do I think these types of changes should be approached? I think there's basically two high-level options. One, you write a script that will automate the change, and then you can review the script, and if you both agree the script is safe, you can trust the output. Or if it's just a find replace, you can have the reviewer watch you run the command and then review it. But what we could also do is break up the change into smaller, more parsable sections. I ran into this problem recently with a podcast program I've been working on for a number of years. I actually started writing this program back in Python 2, so there are some parts of it that aren't using some of the newer Python 3 features because those features weren't around when I wrote it, and I haven't had time or a need to change them yet. But I recently ran into a change related to this and decided to tackle it. The challenge was that this program deals with a lot of file paths. I've got paths to podcasts and I move them around. But like I said, this was written in Python 2. So I didn't have access to the pathlib.path class, which is only introduced in Python 3.4. So this meant that all of my paths are getting passed around as just regular strings. There isn't any way to tell what is a string or a file path without digging into the code. So I realized recently that I could probably make my life a lot easier in some spots if I actually used the path class when I had paths instead of just strings. It would also help the typing because the typing would now know, is this string actually supposed to be a path? It was time to tackle this, and I faced a decision. How do I make this change? I briefly considered just changing the type in a few spots, following all the error messages and trying to change everything all at once, but I realized that that probably wasn't the best approach and would probably result in a PR bigger than I wanted to deal with. I thought about how my program was structured and figured that I had three classes that would probably contain most of the changes. My episode class, my show class, and my database class. So I figured I'd work from episode to database, break that into 3 PRs, and then I'd have one cleanup PR, handle everything else. So 4 small PRs, each well scoped and hopefully easy to review. So let's take a look at those 4 PRs and see how the process went. And let's see how it went off the rails in the 4th PR and what I probably should have done differently there. All right, so here's the first PR where I started by just updating everything in podcast episode. So I started the process here by opening podcast episode and just reading through it, and every time I found a string that was actually a path, I replaced it. I thought initially this was just going to be a simple find and replace, but then I realized that sort of the path function, path class, had a lot of built-in functions I could use instead of the OS level ones. So I decided that I was going to make these changes at the same time. I can see the argument that this probably should have been a separate change because I'm now introducing another difference. We're not just switching sort of from strings to path, but we're also using different functions. But I figured that since, I mean, you can see the size here, it wasn't a huge PR, it maybe made sense to do them at the same time, partially because I probably wasn't going to come back and do it later. So it seemed reasonable to sort of get the full power of path at once. But I could see the argument that it should be split. So the changes to this file were relatively straightforward, and I was able to then use Python typing to sort of help find the functions that were calling in or the spots where it was calling elsewhere that needed to be changed, and I changed those as required. Once I had the typing code all happy, I ran my test suite, and I ended up with 11 failures, and they all involved the same exception. All 11 failures had this same exception. ctypes.argument error, argument 1, type error, wrong type. So if we look at the stack here, we've got pyglet.media.load, where I'm passing in a path. This is my new path instead of just a string. And then down here, it's calling this function mf create source reader from URL, which is actually a system call. And this system call is expecting file name to be a string, not a Python path variable. I hadn't previously done typing with this library before, so that's why I hadn't gotten an error on this line here where I'm actually passing in the wrong type. Luckily, because I had good test coverage, I was able to catch this issue, and looking at documentations, it wasn't too hard to figure out. The pyglet docs actually clearly state that load takes a string, so I did fix this by just casting the path to the string variable, and then the tests were happy. So I managed to find and fix the one issue relatively easily. I've already talked about how I started by changing podcast episodes and how typing helped me see what other files I needed to update, but how did I update them? Let's start by looking at Android phone. So I only needed to make one change here. It had called into the function modified time, which I changed to take a path instead of a string. So here I have this conversion utility that I added that converted a string to a path and passed it in here. Now, if we look at convert util, all that string as path does is turn the string into a path. Why did I add this level of indirection? Why not just do this conversion here? I did this because I was leaving myself a trail of things to fix. When all the conversion work from path to string is done, this file should be a path. So I shouldn't need to do a conversion here. It should just be a path. So by having this call here to this helper function I created, I'm adding some documentation saying, hey, this is a temporary conversion from a string to path, but this input probably should be a path to begin with. So if I had just done the conversion here, I might not have cleaned this up later because I might not have realized it, I might have forgotten about it, or I might have not actually changed file. It might not have triggered other issues. So I'm using convert utils as sort of a reminder function that shouldn't exist in the long term, but can exist for the time period I'm doing this work to do my conversions. Now, I actually got all of this done in one day, so I didn't need these as reminders, but they would have been good if I had been distracted at a point in time and had to leave for a little bit before coming back. All right, even with all of that, it's a relatively small change. Not that many lines, and we've changed one of the 3 classes, so it seems to be going well. I think we'll see how the next PR goes. So having picked my class to clean up this time, podcast show, I used the same approach. I went through podcast show, I found strings that were actually paths, and I changed them, and then I've used typing to find and fix all of my interactions, and I used the convert util helper when I needed to. And yeah, it was pretty straightforward. Was a little larger than the last PR, but it was very quick, very simple, very scoped. I was happy with it. I was able to get it in quickly. Let's see how the database change goes now. Another straightforward change. I Just went through Podcast Database this time, doing the same thing, finding strings that were paths and converting them, using the converter when needed, and using typing to find errors. One thing that was actually really nice about this PR is that Podcast Database didn't need to use the converter anymore. All of its interactions were correctly converted to paths, so this was a nice little win. And this PR, smaller than our second one, it's closer to sort of like the size of the first one. So I feel good about merging it. I clearly understood everything. It was great. And this is where I got overconfident, and this is where I made some mistakes. Let's go look at the fourth PR. This PR, in my mind, was going to be my cleanup PR, just addressing the last few changes. But I think you can see from the number of lines changed and the number of files changed, this was the biggest PR out of all of them, and it wasn't smooth. So what happened? Well, like I said, since the last two PRs had gone so smoothly, I assumed that I had done just a great job and wrapping up would be easy. But the previous PRs had been so smooth because I'd given them clear scope, which made them easy. I'd been making enough changes now that I should have realized that things like Android phone and helper and move file had a fair amount of strings that were actually paths in them. I'd been interacting with these files and making small changes. What I probably should have done, just like I'd had my previous three PRs, probably should have had one PR just for helper, one just for move file, and one just for Android phone. These PRs would have been really easy to do, really simple, because they would have been clearly scoped. And this PR then would have been much smaller and would have actually been a cleanup PR. Instead, how I approached this change was at the beginning, I made the decision, this is my last PR. So I'm going to delete convert-util and clean up all the usage of that and follow everything and do all of that. And I quickly realized that there were more errors than I expected and there were more spots I needed to change, and I probably was taking on too much at once and I wasn't feeling confident. At this point, what I should have done is I should have paused, gone back and been like, yep, you know what, I'm going to do these in separate PRs. I'm going to split up and do easy things. But I decided, nah, I've already started, that'll be too slow. Plus, I was basically done. But I wasn't. The process kept dragging on, because there kept being different things and stuff to clean up, and oh, this other file here now has this. It was too much, and when I completed it, I wasn't happy with it. Does it work? I think so, because I do have decent test coverage. I was fixing all of the typing errors and things. But I'm not as confident about this PR as I was with the others. I should have gone back and split up the work. So while I am happy with my end result here, this last PR was a reminder for me, once again, of the value of smaller targeted PRs. Even though I felt and thought I was at the end, I should have slowed down and acknowledged that, hey, I kind of forgot these other files have a lot of these instances too. Maybe they're worth doing as well. So even though I started this with the intention of clearly breaking up stuff for an easier time, I stumbled at the end and didn't sort of listen to my gut and just steamrolled ahead. It has been fine, but I should have done this in more PRs. Thanks for going through all of that with me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing. If you have any comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below or reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.